the talk, I suggest that the rest of the discussion could happen over tea and coffee in the amphitheatre at 4. For those of you who are new here, the Archives at NCBS is a public collecting centre for the history of science. We collect, preserve and make accessible to the public historical records related to the history of science in contemporary India. You can visit our digital archive on our website archives.ncbs.res.in. We are also open to the public on all weekdays between 10 and 5:30 p.m. Do come and visit us if you haven't already. Our team would be happy to show you around. We'd like to thank our donors. Our work is made possible because of funding from Arcadia Foundation, and the research fellowship is made possible through funding from TNQ Foundation. It has been a pleasure having the first set of research fellows at the archive. We have even surreptitiously managed to lure them to do some archiving, and it has been heartening to see the collections being put to good use. On behalf of the archives, I thank Nisha, Achintya and Vrushal for spending the last 3 months with us. Today's talk is based on the work of wildlife illustrator Carl De Silva, whose collection is available on our website. Vrushal will be looking at De Silva's process in making of birding field guides. Vrushal might be familiar to some of you on campus. He's an independent journalist covering the environment. In his time as a research fellow at the archives at NCBS, he has looked at the Carl De Silva papers and Ravi Shankaran papers. Over to you, Vrushal.
Thanks, Ansh. Thank you. Right. Thank you all for coming. Very good afternoon to you. My time is going to start ticking, and like Anjali said, we've got to keep tight schedule. So I'll try and move through most of the talk. I've got plenty of slides, so kindly bear with me. And that's when I'm going to take the opportunity to thank the archives, because Carl's papers, as you will see, they're absolutely loaded with material. And what's beautiful, I'll try and show you in the slides, is that they've managed to keep some seemingly unnecessary material or innocuous material, but that does lend a lot of meaning to making a backstory, as I try to understand it, of what goes in the making of a field guide. So through the talk, we'll try and come through a journey from guidebooks, or rather identification books, as people, mostly colonial settlers, went out in the field and started to collect material for the museums here in the country, but mostly back in England. From that to where we are right now, where where we use these guides to identify birds and not only to just document them. So that's the journey in the next 40 minutes that I'll try and make. So thank you all also, the online audience, to come in. Hi Sangeeta. Sangeeta is also a wildlife artist, and she's got a correspondence. I couldn't bring that in, but she corresponded with Carl. Carl sadly passed away about 10 years ago this year. So this is already a 10-year anniversary. But before we get to Carl, so this is the timeline that I'll be dealing with. This is from another set of papers that the Archives NCBS has. Ashish Pitti is an author, bird watcher, ornithologist, and mostly documenting tirelessly the bibliography of what all has been written about birds in Indian subcontinent in the past 200 years, 300 years rather. So 1700s to about 2009. Now we are about 15 years ahead of that. But that's when this book came out, Birds in Books. So our timeline starts with John Ray, but I won't go into John Ray. Shamal is here. Everything natural history goes through him. But John Ray is not directly valid to us. So we'll start with John Ray. Is interesting also because he's before Linnaeus. He's the founding father of the Linnaean system. He never comes to India, but he lays out the groundwork for the Linnaean system to take shape. And then the Linnaean system comes into being in mid-1700s, and after that is when a lot of collecting and a lot of colonialists who are already in their colonies, we are concerned with our country, try and go out as they have settled in, or as they are settling in. As you will see in some of the characters, not too long after they have landed in the country, they start collecting material. So, so again here, John Latham, I'll quickly mention, is another interesting character. He also sort of documents a lot of ornithological work. He's an illustrator, never comes here again, back in England, and a lot of material is being shipped to him, and he's sort of making illustrations from that. So our sort of timeline starts with these two gentlemen. On sort of this guy is John. This guy is John Edward Gray. He is he's sort of based in India, who laid the foundation for sort of all the taxonomic work that happens after sort of early 1800s. So he's a zoologist. He's a keeper actually of the British Museum for about 35 years, between 1840 to 1875. So people would send him specimens, and during one such instance, so from the specimens again, he will start to describe species, new to science, which has not been known before. So in the process, he sort of ends up describing about 300 species that were not known before, mostly from the tropics, Australia, India, sort of Southeast Asia region, and that's how they build their sort of the knowledge system. So in one such instance, the gentleman here, Major General Hardwicke, who is based in India, he is not. Hardwicke is sort of a soldier, and in his travels he starts to collect a lot of the flora and fauna, but he's not only doing that, he also interestingly employs back at that time in the mid 80s, early 1800s, to employ native Indians to illustrate what he's collecting. And from those illustrations, once he goes back to England, just before his death, he collaborates with John Edward Gray to bring out the first sort of documentation of Indian birds in Indian ornithology, or sort of birds in India. Those two gentlemen, and this is the book that they bring out. These are sort of very early illustrations of we don't have to get into species, but this is the book that they come out, and it's mentioned based on the collections of Major General Hardwicke. It's called Illustrations of Indian Zoology. So kind of keep a track of the nomenclature as well, how it's named, and how we are progressing from this to where we want to get to. At this point, I'm going to request Achintya to sort of distribute. I see a lot of you are wildlife, from the wildlife background, so you would know what a field guide is. But any of you who wouldn't know, kindly go through, as you listen to this talk, what a field guide is and what we're trying to arrive at. So this just is a documentation, very early documentation of what the flora and fauna is in our country, mostly sort of in the sort of northeast region. The other two main characters in India, or in Indian ornithology at that time, are John Gould and his wife Elizabeth Gould. Again, John Gould is not somebody he's an ornithologist. He starts, he is a gardener and becomes a taxidermist with the Zoological Survey of India in sort of mid 1830s, mid 1827, 28. From that time, sort of in 1830, he gets sent taxidermist birds from the Himalayan region. One doesn't know who sends them, but as early as that, he gets sent a truckload of sort of these taxidermy stuffed specimens, and from those, with the help of his wife Elizabeth Gould, who is the artist and he's the describer, but this is a very early sort of example of what the book comes out to be named, under John Gould's name, but the artist's name is missing, although she happens to be his wife. So the Sanctuary of Birds from the Himalaya mountains is sort of the second sort of documentation that comes out from our country without the actual artists not coming to India. So this is sort of the time period when this sort of thing is very common, and that is sort of also a reflection of a wider society where a lot of collection is happening. The sort of colonialists are sort of settled in, and from that they are describing species. This is sort of the insides of the book, which is just descriptions, and this is sort of the illustration that Elizabeth Gould does. This is not, I mean, this painting is a lithographic painting, which was very common at that time. You would know the process, of lithography, which is very different to sort of sketching and drawing. So that was the more prevalent thing at that time, and from specimens it was a little easier perhaps to do that. So this is sort of just the information that they would describe. That's what they were more interested in, and not really getting into what we will come to, the guidebooks of the range and distribution that slowly starts to happen later. But first they are just interested in documenting and describing species. So because they're all new. These are scarlet minuets, male and female, very different to each other, and very colorful birds. Next up is T.C. Jerden. T.C. Jerden is again a colonial sort of person, but he's based in India. He's a physician. He comes to India in the East India Company time. Now this is about 1836-47, around that time, when the revolt is beginning to happen, but it dies down, as you know. We'll obviously not get into that, but after that is when a lot of his work starts to happen. He starts to collect from sort of southern India, actually, sort of eastern India, Orissa, Andhra Pradesh, that region, and the Chota Nagpur region. So those are sort of the areas that he's traveling in. He collects them, he collects the specimens, and sort of starts to describe them himself. This is a slight change here, where he actually tries to send specimens to somebody in England, but they get sort of infested by moths in one instance. So after that, he doesn't do that, and he starts to describe or illustrate the birds himself. And this is a bit of a change that comes into being quickly in about 30 years of Britishers being in the country. And this is a very common thing that you will see, that these people are sort of describing these species themselves after this, and they are sketchers and illustrators. So this is the book he comes out with, Illustrations of Indian Ornithology, sort of a landmark, a very early document, mostly sort of, it's printed in Madras, 1847, right around the time of the revolt. This is sort of the illustration, and again, mostly just descriptions. You will see, besides him also being an illustrator, he actually employs, you can see a signature here. You may not be able to read it, but it's somebody called Krishna Raju. So he actually employs sort of Indians to illustrate birds that he's collecting, and from that, of course, a lot of these specimens later are transported to England, or in some cases, Madras was at that time a culture of center of science, of discovery. There was a Madras sort of society of naturalists, as later on in Bombay, and before that, around that time in Calcutta. But this sort of description is happening, and Indian sort of natives are starting to collaborate, or they are being employed by the colonials to describe these species. He's mostly based in Trichy, and Trichy actually, like the Patna Kalam that Nisha alluded to, is also a center of art in Tamil Nadu at that time. Obviously that time Madras state, but there is a whole school of people there who are sort of, their employment is illustrating birds. This is a bit of a game changer. The name is also a bit of the game birds of India, Burma and Ceylon. So from sort of smaller regions, around this time, later part of 1800s, after the revolt has died down, the grip has been sort of strengthened. We see a shift from East India Company to directly being governed by the crown. And so the colonialists who are in India, they also start to sort of further out and branch out a lot more and cover more parts of the country and country as a whole, or the Indian subcontinent as a whole. And this man probably must have heard of Hume and Marshall. So this person is Alan Octavio Hume. He's the founder of Indian National Congress, as we know it even now, but also sort of somebody who gathers and gives ornithology some sort of structure as we know it now in the country. So there is a founder member or early member of BNHS. That sort of movement has started in the mid 1800s, 1880s and so on after that, in that period. And he is one of the movers and shakers of that movement. Prolific writer, prolific describer of species. This is a great example. This is a great Indian bustard, endangered bird. Nisha sort of touched upon that. And look at the signature here of the artist Edward Neal. So this is again a time when, because the colonial powers are sort of settled, they are governing, they're not really in this time interacting with the native Indians, and they employ, but they employ the Westerners, but he's sort of slightly not happy with this illustrator, Edward Neal. This is another bird called Hubara bustard, a cousin of the great Indian bustard. And why I'm showing you this image is you can see a very different sort of marking here on the neck, and look at the description here. I'll quickly read that out. The plate would be really good if the chromolithographers had not reproduced the running of the black on the neck, which unfortunately occurred in Mr. Neal's painting. And if human art could do justice to the inconceivably delicate pencilings that adorn the entire upper surface. So he's not really happy with the illustrator. And this is one of the tensions sometimes that you see between the illustrator and the person who is describing the bird. Prevalent in many of such instances across the globe. Because the intention, this is a very descriptive book, first sort of book that gets into sort of major descriptions, and it's a sort of a tome because of the scope of the coverage as well. And this is sort of the actual bird that sort of is, so you can see the difference between the two species or the two images, and he's really not happy with the illustrator. Right? Moving on, another two sort of people who set sort of benchmarks and documented sort of major flora and fauna, Mr. E.W. Oates and somebody called Blandford. They are also sort of colonialists based here, collecting from various parts of India and responsible for mostly describing the fauna of the country, sort of the fauna of British India, including Ceylon and Burma. So again, their sort of the scope is vast. This is in 1889, sort of in Calcutta and Bombay, and this is sort of the early instance where they get into describing the features of a bird. And this is a slight shift that you will see towards actually now from just describing the birds at this time, towards the later part of the 19th century, to actually getting interested in identifying birds in the field, little bit for leisure, a little bit for game, little bit for curiosity more so. And sort of early trappings or early sort of baselines for forming bird watching as a culture, even amongst the colonialists, but later on as well the Indians, as you will see in a sort of in short about 20-30 year period. So this is how the book is. W.T. Blandford, it's edited by him, but it's still for the state of India and council, and these two are sort of always sort of reverential towards the crown and towards the people back in England. This is sort of the descriptions and sort of the illustrations of the book. A little bit of a change from lithography. Chromolithographers, as you saw in Hume's book as well. This is a bit different of getting into sketches and charcoal and that sort of actual illustration and describing even parts of the bird like we were trying to talk about. So it's again a very descriptive tomb of a document which gets into heads and different parts of all sorts of birds. And this is a multi-volume, if you go up and see, there's a multi-volume compendiums that these guys start to get into. But at the same time, some people are interested in documenting local flora and fauna. Somebody who, if you've read E.H.A. Atkin, Edward Atkin, he's one of the humorists of this time, and a couple of his books, Naturalists on the Prowl and one more, which is, I forget right now, but it's very sort of, he's just forays into places in and around Bombay, and he's writing them very humorously. And look at this sort of, he's just illustrating with pen and ink, sorry. So this sort of thing also is a slight bit of shift from the lithographs and the chromolithographs to starting to illustrate with pen and using more of sketches as we go along. This is published in Bombay. It's not, again, it's not a field guide. It's more of a, just a sort of almost like a storybook, almost like a, leisure reading, where he's describing the birds, illustrating them, and giving some sort of descriptions about it. These are vultures, probably on sort of, at that time there were many, not anymore, but probably on a tower of silence, a Parsi tower of silence. But these are all observations, as you can see, slightly different. The person's gone out in the field and sort of tried to depict them. Again, a bit of an anomaly is Douglas Devar. Douglas Devar is also somebody who I think is very underrated, but has done extensive amount of work in different kinds of books, very local, birds of the plains. So now, as they are also branching out, some people, like I said, are focusing on certain areas. So Devar does plains, does hills, does different kind of ecosystems. And this is sort of the time, late 1900s, early 20th century, when photography has also started to come in. And this is reflected in this book, where based on some photographs, this person has sort of illustrated some of the birds. Birds of the Indian Garden. This is again something very different, as people are documenting different ecosystems. You can see here with 30 colored plates and numerous illustrations in the text. This is somebody called C.N. Inglis, curator of the Darjeeling Museum that Nisha would be familiar with, and that movement there is also in full swing with the Asiatic Society of Bengal, and he's the curator for a long time there, and he's also collecting sort of species, and he himself is an illustrator. So this is an example of sort of the kind of stuff in the book, because again it's a book that's not very it's not trying to document sort of wider things, but just very specific, birds in the garden and stuff like that. So these are the two birds, and he himself has this copy is from Ministry of Culture, CSL is the library, but very old, and this is sort of what's called a plate in a bird book. So this you will see quite a bit now as people start to describe sort of full length and birds in greater detail after just documentation. So we are slowly moving towards what will eventually become a field guide, which we've distributed, and how that is. This is about hitting the 20th century, turn of the century, that sort of period. Like I said, the anomaly is Douglas Devar, because he does one book, Game Birds, based on wood engravings, which it's almost like block printing. A block of wood is very finely chiseled into a shape of the bird, and that is mostly ink, not color, and it's just inked on a surface, on a paper, and that's how it's printed. This is how it looks. Might look a little granularly pixelated. These are sort of words we know now, but this was an attempt by the artist to document the birds in a very different way. And sort of Game Birds by Douglas Devar. He's writing multiple books, and this is 1928. So well into sort of the 20th century now. About 1932, another gentleman called E.C. Stuart Baker comes out with multi-volume book on carrying on from the birds of what Hume and people before him have done. But he also comes out with a slightly different book on nidification, which is the nest building activity of birds. And this is sort of what he documents with 8 plates only, but they're getting into a little more of knowledge building and bird watching as sort of, not only documentation but field science and a little bit of research. So very specific. They also collect huge number of eggs, about 50,000 eggs. English collects and sends them to a British museum at about this time, because they are starting to get a sense that politically also things are beginning to change. So these sort of things are reflected in an activity like sort of ornithology, early years of ornithology in India. A very interesting book that comes out, and sort of we see a shift around the same time. This is 49, but actually this is a little earlier, 34. This is a bit of a this edition is the 4th edition, but the first edition that this man brings out, called Hugh Whistler, is the popular Handbook of Indian Birds. And do notice now the word handbook is coming into being. So this is the sort of first instance where from just documentation, descriptive, sort of major compendiums, we are moving towards some sort of a guide that people can take in the field. But it is not the case. He's got about 24 full plate illustrations like this, with a lot of field identification sort of coming in, what you can look for, but it is more descriptive. It's still low on illustrations. But this is sort of the first instance in about 1934 that Hugh Whistler starts to has put together, and this becomes a benchmark for Salim Ali, the sort of the bird man of India, as you were called, who has done extensive work, and we'll come to it. So in the later years as well, Hugh Whistler is constantly in touch. He goes back to England after the partition, after independence, and from there he's corresponding with people like Salim Ali and BNHS folks, and describing species and doing taxidermy from there as well. But he leaves a very important document called the Popular Handbook of Indian Birds. We come to Salim Ali. Sort of his book is the Book of Indian Birds, the first sort of book that is small and tries to document birds in the region, taking off from Whistler's work. He's also, as you would know, trying to do regional surveys, and that's his main contribution, according to me, that he's done all these regional surveys with state help, with the help of Maharajas and people like that, to document birds in the region. Now Indians start to come into the picture at this time. This is about early 1950s, and this person called R.S. Dharmakumar Singh Ji, he brings out a book of his region. He's a royalty from there, and this is sort of the book that he puts together. And look at the illustrations, slightly different to what you've been seeing now, and we get to more sort of identification and illustration heavy books than descriptive books. You would know of him, sort of collaborated with Salim Ali and started to, brought out these 10-volume sort of landmark, Sidney Dillon Ripley, who was an American also supported Salim Ali and organizations like BNHS heavily, and a lot of the ornithological research that the country has seen and what we will come to as well with Carl sort of owes to people like him, or the collaborations that are starting to form. And this is sort of the first handbook of Indian birds. But as you can see from this, it is also first sort of handbook, but it's multi-volume, so difficult to carry everywhere. So it's still not one book that you can go into field and start to identify birds with all over the country, anywhere you'd like to go. But people weren't traveling at that time as much. They were sort of moving in their own areas. And so this becomes important documentation of birds there. And this has illustrators from India. One of Salim Ali's favorite, somebody called JP Rani. I couldn't find a photograph of him, but he's employed with BNHS, and he's sort of the main person that illustrates these books. Again, somebody, if you are familiar with the archives at NCBS, you would know a recent collection that's been put up. Somebody called Jamal Ara, operating in the Chota Nagpur region, and she comes out with Watching Birds, this sort of book for children. And again, it's not a bird guide, but sort of just for children, sort of descriptions of birds and some sort of information. Policeman, as it were called, the drongo, sort of based on their behavior and so on and so forth. So, but riddled with sort of illustrations. Salim Ali carries on working. He sort of passes on only in the 1980s, 87. Before that, he turns a lot of his data, little bit what you guys do, churn data into different things. He comes up with the pictorial guides to the birds of Indian subcontinent. And this is sort of the first book that you see from the handbook, a change in nomenclature. You see pictorial word being used, and it becomes sort of very low on description. And these are not corresponding sort of slides, but this is sort of the plate then that forms from a single bird. You start to see multiple birds in one plate itself of illustrated birds, and their descriptions or their identification features, and not their habits, habitat, their natural history, none of that. That's all gone. We only get sort of very short descriptions, but still maps are missing. Maps of their ranges or where they are found is missing. But still it becomes the first book after the popular handbook to be sort of the first sort of guidebook, as we were to call it later, right? And this is where we will start our actual journey. I've taken way too much time, but Birds of Indian Subcontinent way in the 1990s is something that is sort of the field guide. From the pictorial guide, we come to field guides. And that means that you can take this guide along with you that's been distributed to you into the field or into a forest on a walk and try and get to describing birds. How? We'll get to that. Before that, just a quick sort of mention of look at the illustrators here. Lot of illustrators contributing to this field guide. This is also a first major change, or as you know, field guides are being sort of corporatized or commissioned not by societies but by publishers and book sort of enthusiasts, that they are able to commission artists to bring out books which are field guides. And for that you cannot have one artist, because there are about 1,000 birds. This book covers about whole range of birds in India, which is about more than 1,000, 1,200 odd birds. And there are all of these sort of are contributing to the plates, by which this is a plate, and each artist is contributing several plates to a field guide. And one name here is of importance to us, or of concern to us in this talk, is Carl de Silva. He's the only sort of Indian, is the only Indian who is sort of contributed to this and many other field guides, mostly commissioned by Helm Publishers based in London. No other sort of Indian has been able to do that after or before him. And this is sort of what we get into first sort of mention of maps, or initial, at least for our region. This which means the distribution of where the bird is found. That means that people are traveling, you can go and look for them in that region. This is obviously advanced in present day, all the distributions. I won't get into that, we don't have time for it. But this is a new addition. And hence now, with 3 elements of a guidebook, it becomes a guidebook. You have illustrations and their names, the distribution, and the description. So these are sort of the tenets of the guidebook, and this is called a plate, various plates with the species list. And we are going to quickly see what goes into making of a plate through the papers or through the collection of Carl de Silva. So Carl de Silva, here he's on field. He's an Indian sort of artist who grew up in Bombay, born in Hyderabad but grew up in Bombay, and went to JJ School of Art. And he gave up, or I mean he turned course and sort of joined BNHS as a staff artist to do sort of these sort of things. But before that, he was always deeply interested in illustrating birds. These are a couple of images from which are beautifully preserved. He must be about 10 years old. He was born in 1963, and this is about when he was 10, 12 years old. This is sort of the work that he's producing in his school and entering the school competitions. So he's sort of developing, very quickly we'll see what sort of, how he comes to being an artist, as it were. So when he starts to move with BNHS and the scientists, that he's employed with them, this sort of very rough sketches and markings which become very important in knowing birds in the field, he's sort of employing that. Just a quick set of images that he's done from rough sketches like that to sort of doing these sort of identification marks so that he can remember and he can sort of hone his art, hone his skill. This is a very quick sort of Fatehpur in Madhya Pradesh, a display of bustard preening that he's just quickly noticed, and this is sort of very important in his own understanding as well as in contributing to the reports that he's illustrating for. And this is sort of the collaboration that science and art sort of is seeing in, at BNHS at that time. This is again very similar to that. Again, very detailed work that he's going through. Here you can see him on field with all his paraphernalia, art sort of supplies, and this is how he's illustrating the birds there. And constantly taking notes so that it's as you will see in further years, 10 years later, when he gets the opportunity to start illustrating for the guidebooks, he's already sort of ready to cut out mistakes, but also know his birds. So which becomes very important, because in the cutthroat world of bird illustration, a lot of publishers won't just give you because you're an artist. It's a very specialized field of bird art, and as you will see from some of the reviews, it is sort of very punishing. This is just a very quick recap, just to mention how he's collaborating. He's sort of, probably you can't read, but list of birds to be drawn for the monograph. Specimen given to Mr. C. D'Souza. This is the curator of the BNHS museum. He's drawn out a list and he's taken out of total specimens, 47 specimens. So from the specimens is what an artist, apart from going in the field, that becomes his major reference point. Dead specimen, taxidermied specimen, you can make out still all the features of the bird, and from that you draw. So a lot of these artists, and he becomes an example who gets sent birds from the other way. It's slightly, ironic that a lot of these birds are actually sent to him from England, which are actually collected in our country in the first place. So this is sort of the early drawings of Carl de Silva, and you will see sort of the change that he goes in about 15-20 years time. I'll quickly skip through this, but if you're interested, this is lovely. That is the, this is where I would like to again thank the processing archivist of this collection, Datri. She's not here, but all of them together have decided that a lot of these sort of, scripts and scraps of papers are not to be thrown, and they're preserved, and you can run with it in very different ways of understanding what the artist is trying to do and what their output is. But this is again, if you remember the early Florican or Bustard work, Sailana, he's collaborating with Ravi Sankaran. He's in field and he's just documenting behavior in very rough sketches. So just interested female, lesser Florican. So this could be a completely different talk, and I'm trying to make sense of this sort of artistry as well for Ravi's work. But a bird flying on top, landscape, and just a quick sort of display of this bird here jumping from the grasslands there, and this sort of again displaying various different stances. This is the Bustard postures, again just rough cuts, but he's understanding behavior along with the scientist, so he can inform the scientist or what they're trying to do in the reports, which probably is of interest to you. And I don't know if labs here would like to employ artists, but I think it's not a bad idea. So this is very rough, and from that, these are sort of the, look at this preening, Carl 86, he's sort of in his mid-20s and coming up with these sort of illustrations that are used by scientists to not only inform funders, but also their own work and their own understanding in their reports. So a little bit of trivia, that's the beauty of archives, very quickly, that you come across material that you've not expected, and it sort of can throw you in very different ways. I don't know if you can recognize these two. Any guesses? And I'll tell you what's happening here. He is sort of moving away from wildlife, just dabbling into some other artist is an artist. He can do very many things. This man is Pradeep Kishan, and she is Arundhati Roy, the famous author. And this is on the sets of a movie called Electric Moon that Pradeep Kishan directed and Arundhati Roy acted in. And Carl is here. He is holding sort of what Pradeep Kishan or this lady is holding, sort of a prop on the sets. And so he was sort of an art consultant on the project. And they became good friends. And this is very telling. I've not had the time or sort of the bandwidth to include, but Pradeep Kishan, as you know, has sort of come out with the, also goes on to give up filmmaking and get into making field guides, mostly for trees. And they are friends, they keep in touch, and who knows, we don't have papers for that, but they're sort of exchanging notes, and that sort of interaction happens. But he goes off, he gets a chance to go off, the first artist to go, if you read the bio in, as described by the archives, he goes off to England, and he's the first sort of artist to be exhibition to showcase his work in UK in the Society of Wildlife Artists there, which is sort of a cult, sort of a very closed door space and very competitive. That is where he gets a contract to illustrate, start to illustrate field guides. I'm going to quickly just show one example. I had intended to show two, but we'll sort of get a sense of what his process is like very quickly. This is for pheasants, partridges, and grouse. Grouse are not found in India. Partridges, pheasants are, but grouse is not. So that is where he is commissioned to illustrate for these guidebooks, which are of a wider region in Southeast Asia. And couple of this is sort of the initial correspondence that his publisher and the author of the book are sort of interacting with him. This is 1995 September, a few days apart, and the publisher or the author of the book says, "I'm delighted that you are to work on this project. Robert has sorted out 10 plates for you to do, as I'm enclosing this list of figures for each plate. And please to send me a batch of rough plate design, fax if you wish, just for outlines for me to say, okay, you start to paint." So this is sort of the language that they have, or the understanding, where the artist is firstly commissioned, and then how he goes about that and sort of corresponds in sort of non-technological era in the 90s to come out with the bird. This is the editor. Please find an enclosed list of plates for pheasants, partridges, and grouse that I've marked for you. So this is in London. So they are sending plates like these sort of references for Carl to come up with. These are pheasants not found in India, but these are sort of references that he has to keep in mind. Carl is writing back to say, I hope all's well, I'm a bit concerned, I haven't got any word from you, blah blah blah, and to set to start painting. So he's corresponding with it, but at the same time, a friend of his is in London at the museum, and he's procuring the taxidermied specimens for him, or making notes, and then that is relayed to him later. Just a quick thing on another project, this becomes a little bit of a standard practice of the methods, of the research activity, a little bit like how you guys do science, that research activity, recruitment of senior fellow, collection of available data on birds of Kerala. This is another book that ultimately doesn't work on, but he's got an MOU with the Kerala Forest Department, and full-time research fellow, sort of monthly remunerations and the full project cost. And this is sort of the timeline. And this is sort of the publication, the end, the background objectives, as you also have, and methodology involved in doing that. These are sort of the specimens from the Natural History Museum that he's referencing. They are tagged, long dead, sourced from all parts of the world. And this is, very quickly, I'll go through this, we don't have too much time. First up is just rough cuts of, just sort of rough cuts of outlines of the bird that he wants to do. Several of them at a time. He's just sort of illustrating, getting a sense of his hand. This is a chart paper, not the paper that he will ultimately sort of work with, but it helps to sort of form initial ideas. But this is what the crux for him is, and there are so many of these papers in the archives. It's beautiful to see, because these papers, this is the tracing paper, this can be cut out, and he does cut them out to do other things as well, in sort of the plating and comparison of each bird. But this also is very sort of a substrate that allows him to resketch and send drafts to the editor, because you can trace this outline on the chart paper or on a more solid paper. So this is the pheasants that he's illustrating for, and look at that. From the tracing paper, he's made a sort of a Xerox, and this he can send to the editor, whereas he can keep this. So that is sort of the working that he's going on with. Many of them, and here comes sort of the responses soon back from the editors. I'll have to quickly go through this, but sort of very different sort of birds, and you can see repeated drawings. So he's making sort of changes to that. Here as well, these are sort of red markings back from the editor. Look at that. There's a lot of writing here. It's like a review process, like what you guys do. That a lot of corrections can be made here on the tracing paper itself, based on the feedback, so that you get a sense of what needs to be improved in the outline of the bird. For example, look at this. The outline is completely sort of different, but maybe Carl has redone the outline a bit later, right? The bird, the feather, the tail markings as well. That is what gives you the leverage to do sort of these sort of markings. Very extensive sort of remarks here. See comments that somebody's told him to look at. Look at the sort of the detail that they're discussing. The neck is to be sort of more squeezed in. It cannot be budged. And Carl, about a year later, writes back, and he gets sort of a response from Steve again. But male in display is excellent. Male in display is excellent. A lot of those birds, the grouses that he was doing. So he sort of gets a go ahead to do what we call the pre-plates. And this is just before what the plate is formed. So he's now free to actually illustrate properly and thoroughly and fully this sort of a plate to go for publication. This is just before publication. So that again, if there are any other remarks, last minute changes, as even in filmmaking, you know, that happens, or in your manuscripts as well, that they can do. And this is sort of the invoice that he sends. So I will sort of stop here because this is sort of the plate that we were trying to arrive at. The first, what you have also seen in the bird books that you have. And this becomes the field guide of a book. And from distribution maps, the descriptions and the plate that the artist has illustrated, it becomes a guidebook. So I've completely overrun with time, but I'm going to stop here because we've got another engagement. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you for listening.
I think we can take one question. I think we can take one question because we have to leave at 3:55.
So I've made complete sense or no sense. Any questions online? Yes, you can check with Sangeeta later. Of course.
This is a question for the archives. What happens in the digital era? Will the archives not take such material?
No, even in the digital era, I'm not sure what you mean, but this all has, I mean, he worked till about 2015, right? And a lot of the clippings, correspondences, and even the art can be sort of, you know, does make sense to be looked at.
Do you have emails of it?
Of?
Of Carl Desi?
Yes, yes. I was not able to show, but yeah, that does happen, especially in the Indian field guide with inskips and people like that. He's corresponding over email. Yes.
Hi, very interesting. I was curious, so if you see the company style of art, which was devoid of backgrounds, and Indian style usually has very populated backgrounds, and it seems like in the field guides, we have found our way back to company style of art. Do you think that is because the origin of field guides as a form started in the West as opposed to East? Do you think field guides would look different if it started here?
That's a great imaginative question. I think so too. I think there is scope for it to be sort of decorated with a little bit of other things. And there are some that you have, especially in the pictorial guide, if you see, Salim Ali, where Indian artists are engaged, they do have some grass or some sort of creeper, some sort of substrate that comes in, but not in this. But that's a great question. Yeah, I think there is scope for that. But unfortunately, as you know, everything's come from the West and we sort of adapt to that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Vrushal.
Thank you.
Continue the discussion over tea and coffee at 1:00 p.m.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thanks.